So I apologize. It looks like the pictures on my slides didn't quite come out, so I can send a PDFs to share around with folks if they want to see the full slides. But I'll go ahead and dive in and tell you a little bit about Amendment 5. I'm going to first just talk about kind of nuts and bolts of what it does. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the estimates that Missouri Budget Project has put together on that amendment. And then I'll end by really tying it specifically to what the impact we think might be on public education. So again, I'm Lindsey Baker. I'm with the Missouri Budget Project, and we're an organization that focuses on budget tax policy here in Missouri. We've been following Amendment 5 very closely. What Amendment 5 is places a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would require lawmakers to eliminate the income tax, but would also allow lawmakers to greatly expand sales taxes to services or increase the sales tax rate. So why is this on the ballot? So the reason that this is on the ballot is right now there are constitutional provisions in place that limit lawmakers' ability to raise taxes without going to a vote of the people. So the reason this is going to be placed on the ballot is to give lawmakers the ability to bypass those limits on their power to raise sales taxes. That is why this is on the ballot. Lawmakers could eliminate the income tax without going to the ballot, but they cannot increase those sales taxes without going to the ballot. And so what this really does, again, it requires lawmakers to eliminate the income tax, allows them to expand the income tax. But beyond that, we don't have any level of detail of what this would actually do. And that's because what we are voting on here is not the plan. We do not know what the plan would be. We are simply voting to give lawmakers the authority to increase those sales taxes, require them to eliminate the income tax, and then the details of that plan would be developed by lawmakers, future lawmakers, unelected lawmakers, in a future session. So we really have to trust that we know what the plan is without any of that being in writing. And we can move on to the next slide. So, we don't have the details of a plan, so we do have to make some guesses based on what we know the income tax currently brings in, and what lawmakers have suggested they might do to replace that income tax. We've done a lot of research on what other states have done in this situation. So here's what we do know. Missouri's income tax brings in $8.5 billion a year to support public services. That's a lot of funding. So in order to replace that with sales taxes, either by increasing the current sales tax rate or by expanding to services, that could be veterinary services, legal services, rent, childcare, any sort of service that you pay for every day. If that were replaced, the income tax were replaced with a sales tax, that is actually a tax increase for the vast majority of Missourians. And that's because most people pay the majority of their taxes in property taxes and sales taxes, not in income taxes. It's really only the very wealthy that pay most of their taxes in income taxes. So it's really only a tax cut for those at the very top end of income. It's really just shifting who pays taxes in this case. And we know that by looking at other states that do not tax income. They are only low tax for the wealthy. They are not low tax for others. But we also know that it's because the income tax makes up $8.5 billion, or 2/3 of our state budget. That means it's very unlikely that lawmakers can actually fill that hole. So we know in other states what has happened is, yes, sales taxes go up. Yes, that increases cost of living for families, but also at the same time as you're paying more, you're actually getting fewer services because it also triggers deep cuts to services that are funded out of the state budget. And I'll move on to the next slide. There's lots of services that are funded out of the state budget. So the state budget pays for senior services, for health care. But one of the main line items in the state budget is education, public education. And we know from past history in Missouri, when there is a budget shortfall, one of the first things that lawmakers have gone to in the past has been to make cuts to state funding for public schools. So we know that's one of the first things on the chopping block when we hit these budget shortfalls. So what's at risk? Well, I said before, we know that we can't fully close the gap that income tax would leave. And we estimate that if, as the governor has indicated, we taxed services but exempted health and housing, which again is not in the bill, but taking them at their word. If that were the case, we cannot make up that hole in the budget. That would leave a nearly $6 billion hole in our budget. It just does not, you cannot tax enough to fill the income tax. So what does that mean for services? A gap of that size, a $6 billion gap in our budget, means a nearly $1.4 billion cut to Missouri's public schools statewide. That translates to an average cut of $1,800 per student. That is the equivalent of the salary of nearly 27,000 teachers and 46,000 support staff. So these are very significant cuts across our state. And we know that because of the way the foundation formula and education is funded here in Missouri, we are already down to the bare bones. Our state already spends less than almost every other state in the nation. And we know that rural districts in particular and charter schools rely very, very heavily on that state revenue versus local revenue. So this would have real impact on real Missourians. So that's why we are very concerned about this proposal. In summary, we think Amendment 5 would raise taxes on most Missourians, trigger massive cuts to services, including public education. And I'll